Well, good morning, everyone. Thomas Montgomery here. We get together with our distribution partners most weekday mornings at this time, 8 o'clock Central, to talk about strategies, tips, techniques, share success stories, and support each of you. Over the past few weeks, we've had a focus on talking about running your branch like a business, making sure that it's profitable, making sure that you're enrolling clients. So you're helping people and that you're making money and getting paid on a daily basis. We've talked about leads. We've talked about advertising. I think we've pretty much covered probably all that needs to be said there. If you want to go back and view any of those on our YouTube channel, Business Paralegal, you can go back and view the prior trainings. Today, we're going to revisit it, and there's not a change, but we're just going to revisit what happens once a client has enrolled. So we're kind of fast forwarding beyond the fact that you have found a client, you've educated a client, you've contracted with the client. That has already happened. Now we're going to talk about implementation. So I should be sharing my screen with you, and you should see the little text box here that I like to use to take notes. All right, so once the client has enrolled, which specifically means they've signed your contract, right? Because as a branch office, you're the one contracting with the client. They contract under what we say your paper, under your branding, and they've paid you either the $2,500, which is the norm, or they at least paid you the $500 down. So all that has happened. Now we're talking about implementation. So first thing that we will do is send an onboarding email to the client copying you. Now, that email is going to demonstrate that right out of the chute, immediately, we are delivering upon the promises that are made. So in that onboarding email, it will assign their unique address because this is the process we go through. And in the past, I've said that to people, but it seems that there needs to be more discussion, which is fine. That's what we're going to have today. But just so you know, these bullets in this order is what we do. That's why they're here. But nonetheless, so the onboarding email will go to the client, will copy you. It's going to provide them their unique address. Also, in that onboarding email is going to be a link. So let's go ahead and change this. Includes a link to the setup form. That setup form is important because it tells us a few things about the client that we need to know to implement. The first question that it asks is, do you want us to create a new entity, or are we going to use an existing entity of yours for the capital raise? It doesn't matter to us, but we need to know. Well, I guess I shouldn't say it doesn't matter. It matters to us because we need to know, are we going to go do the next step and file with the Secretary of State based upon the name that they provide, and that name is provided in the setup form? Or is it, no, they already have an entity that we're going to be using for the capital raise, therefore we don't need to form a new business. So that's number one. We have changed the process to enhance it. So now there's also a call. So also on step one, the funding coordinator calls the client. So the funding coordinator calls the client to say, hey, make sure you look for this setup form. And do you want a first tranche of financing? Remember, we had a separate training on that. So obviously the business is not fundable yet. Don't be confused by this offer that if they need an initial tranche, that would be based upon their baseline qualifications because we've not built a fundable business yet. So this was a new element that we talked about a few days ago. We had a training on. So that's what happens first. And then, of course, if the client says to the funding coordinator, yes, I want to see what kind of funding offers that they can get now, then the funding coordinator helps them fill out the application. So that's kind of an adjunct process. It's not core to what we're talking about, so I'm not diagramming all that out, but this is what happens first. So it's great, right? So quickly, the client, we're implementing the client. So we never want a client to come back and say to you or say to us, well, I signed up and I paid and nothing happened. That should never happen. That should never happen because we're already working down the deliverable list from day one, and we provide the address and then find out if they want us to do this. If they want us to file with the Secretary of State, then that would be the second step. File with the Secretary of State. Now, we'll call it 2A and then 2B as far as sub-steps. So if they say on the setup form that they do want us to form a new entity, which we do for free, and then they provide us the name that they want, so then we do that normally within 1 business day. We've seen really good turnaround. So this program is working really well. So if you don't think it is, there's a break in communication because we're witnessing, I believe, 99.99% of the time, clients are coming in and being processed very quickly, very efficiently. If you don't feel that way, we need to talk because most likely it's an email issue where you're not seeing or they're not checking their email. Okay, so then we're going to send, well, let's be specific. We're going to email a confirmation to client when filed. So the verb we're using here is filed. So it doesn't mean that it's been approved. It's not formed yet, but we've gone on to the Secretary of State system and we filed it. So we don't want the client in a black hole not knowing, well, I wonder if these people are doing anything. We send them an email, we copy you, and it has the actual tracking number from the Secretary of State. So it can't be that we're just bluffing them. We're literally documenting, yes, we have filed the entity name with the Secretary of State. Then when we get response back from the Secretary of State, and that's turning around pretty quickly in just a couple business days, then we email the client the formation documents that come back from the Secretary of State. Specifically, there's 2 PDFs, and one is the certificate and the other is the acknowledgement. Now, this is going to get a little confusing. So step 3 is the third step is the EIN. So we need to obtain EIN. But just so you know, that trigger is in 2B above. So back when I said that we'll email the client with the formation documents, which we do, and we copy you on that. Also in this same communication is where we start the EIN. So 2B happens at the same time as 3. Any questions so far? So this isn't real exciting, but I had a couple of you, including Bernard, who's on, thanks, Mr. Barching, ask for details of what's the process. So I want you to know the process. So this is great, right? We're doing exactly what we promised to do. I believe with all my heart, I don't know what to say, but I fully believe that we are 100% compliant with client implementation of delivering what we promised to deliver. So there's no risk to the client. I can't imagine how a client would come back to you and say, oh, you guys didn't do what you promised to do, because we will do it and we do it promptly. And I'm describing to you the steps. Any questions so far on the first 3 steps? If you have any questions, comments, concerns, type it into the Q&A. All right, so Timothy has a question, and that's good. So back on the setup form authorizes, so the client is authorizing us to file the entity for them with the Secretary of State. So there's an explicit authorization, but the client is the registered agent. So there's not some middleman getting between the client and their business. So we're not a shareholder, we're not the registered agent, we don't have authority for the business. So all is good there. Bernard's asking who applies to the EIN. So this is done normally together. So normally we will do this together with the client. We'll be on the phone and we'll do it together with them. That's the norm. So remember, our service model is to have weekly calls with each of these clients. So if you're referring people in and they're coming back to you with a bunch of questions, probably what that is suggesting is that they're not following the service model, which is they either assign to me or one of our other advisors, and we should be working with them directly and having weekly scheduled calls, which you're welcome to be on as well. There's no secrets. It's just that's the beauty of this model is you're not burdened with doing the implementation. We handle that. All right, so now the EIN has been obtained, and then now open business bank account. Then what we're going to do is work on the business credit profiles. So think of like Dun and Bradstreet, for example. The first step on that is we need to set up the profile. So that might mean, for instance, obtain a D&B number. Because before we start adding trade lines, which we do, and we'll talk about that in just a moment, we're going to first get for instance, we have to apply for a DUNS number. That's free. Get the DUNS number, make sure that the profile, the Dun and Bradstreet profile is built out. In other words, making sure that the industry code is correct and the address and the phone number and number of employees, because the more complete the business credit profile is, the more fundable the business is. So that's 5A. And then 5B, we add primary trade lines. We want to add at least 4. So let's at least 4 trade lines. Well, why 4? Because it takes 4 trade lines posted to Dun and Bradstreet to create a paydex score. Now, if the client wants more than 4, that's fine. And we've had separate discussions. There's different types of trade lines we can add. The 4 main categories that they can choose from, they don't have to have any from each category, but the 4 categories would, and I guess we'll go ahead and just put it on here so you have it. So 5B1 would be mortgages. 5B2 would be business equipment / autos. 5B3 would be business credit cards. And we're talking about credit cards under the EIN, not showing on personal credit. And then 5B4 would be net 30 accounts. So we work with each client to identify what do they want for their composition of trade lines. We know we need to add at least 4 because 4 is the number that's needed to create a paydex score at Dun and Bradstreet. So let's pause there. Any questions on step 5? This is the longest part of the process because we need these trade lines to post. And so of all the steps, this is the longest one. Okay, any questions so far? All right, so Carol's asking a question, and that's good. So let's do this a little bit different to better address what Carol's asking. So let's go back up. So 1A, the funding coordinator calls the client to see if they want first tranche financing. In other words, an initial round of funding even before the business is fundable. And then If so, funding coordinator assists client in obtaining funding, offers with no hard inquiries. Okay, so I just wanted to go back and address Carol's point because I guess it's a bigger deal. It's not core to creating a fundable business, but if what the client is wanting is an initial tranche, then that's where it happens here very, very early on. All right. So Ashley's asking if the client wants first tranche financing. So yeah, so what will happen is the funding coordinator will work with the client, fill out a one-page app, and then we'll present those offers to the client. The client can choose any of those offers. Typically, a client will get 6 to 8 offers, and the offers will have their own terms, and then the client can decide which ones they want. But it's obviously based upon the client's baseline credibility because we've not built a fundable business yet. It's after we've completed these steps that we have a fundable business. So if we're all the way up here, already applying for the first tranche, first round of financing, of course, the business isn't fundable yet. All right, so then we didn't have any questions on the trade lines, which is great. I figured we would. So then we get to financials, which is the last step before we go to funding, by the way. So now we need to build out financials. An important financial is the balance sheet. So we're going to help the client create a balance sheet. Some clients don't even know what balance sheets are, and I have common discussions, including with one of our top. So we have a gentleman, Anthony, and Anthony's not on the training. We have a different Anthony on training this morning, but not the Anthony I'm speaking of. So Anthony's great. He's a truck driver, just signed up as a branch, already brought on his first client yesterday, which is awesome. And then Anthony also enrolled his own business to get funding. So technically, Anthony has 2 clients already within his first 48 hours, which is great. And that's pretty typical. So, but Anthony, again, he's new. So he said the same thing we often hear. Well, my business is new. I don't have a balance sheet. I don't need that. What's the point? Well, you and I know the balance sheet is crucial, right? So just because a business is new, it doesn't mean that they have to have a weak balance sheet. But what we're going to do is look at the balance sheet as a baseline, just like if you went to the doctor. You all know I have stage 4 cancer. So I was at the doctor yesterday for 2 hours. So what happens first thing when you go into the doctor? They do some tests, or at least they check your blood pressure and temperature, if nothing else, right? So it's baseline data. So we need to look at each client's baseline balance sheet. What do they have now? And then make sure that that balance sheet is presentable to the lender. And if it needs to be strengthened, we do strengthen it. And automatically we provide, so we transfer the 10K of collateral, which are receivables. So some people say, well, why don't we transfer the 10K right up front? Well, theoretically we could, but if the client, if we've not made it to the point where we have a balance sheet to post the asset to, which we had a recent discussion on assets, then it's kind of orphaned out. So this is just a natural place. But if you have a client that's real wire and says, no, I want my 10,000 right away, we can do that. It's not going to make much sense. And this is where we actually work with them. And so then 6C is where we can actually liquidate the receivables and turn into cash. There's a couple ways that can happen. So 6C1 would be to factor. We have a factoring company that will factor 97 cents on the dollar. So the client would receive 9,700 from the factoring company. And or we could litigate, assuming that if the The debtor that owes the money, the receivables, doesn't willingly pay, then we could litigate and we'll take care of that for them. And that tends to be very effective. All right. So Marilyn makes a good point. This seems to be quite the process. Well, yeah, because we're creating a fundable business, right? So let's go back up here and state what's the goal? Create a fundable business. Well, what does it take to have a fundable business? The 3 C's, right? We all learned this in school, probably 6th or 7th grade. What does it take to have a fundable business? Credit, collateral, capacity. Well, that's what we provide in the program. So it's too good to be true, Marilyn or anyone else, to think that, oh, I can just sign up and I suddenly have a fundable business. That's not reasonable. Well, maybe they have more of these pieces in place, but normally this is a 30 to 60 day process to go through the process. Now we can get that initial tranche, the first tranche, sooner. All right, so the goal today was specifically because of Mr. Barchi, but just in general to make sure you understood the process. So if you bring a client on and they say, oh, I haven't heard anything, then there's a breakdown on number one. And most likely that means that they didn't open the email. And you could let us know and we can check and resend the email. But a lot of people use consumer grade emails. And so if what we're sending has attachments and or links, and we know this has a link, right? Because it has the link to the setup form. If it goes into their junk mail and they're not checking their junk mail, then there's a problem. But I believe that we have largely solved that now because we've added step 1A, which wasn't there originally, whereby the funding coordinator is calling them to confirm they received it and to see, do you want first tranche financing? All right, so there's quite a few other questions. I think many of them are best one-on-one. So again, our service model with you is to have weekly calls. So let's make sure that you're scheduling those and we can dig deeper, especially when you have client-specific questions. But at least hopefully today you have a more thorough understanding of what it takes to create a fundable business. It's the 3 C's, just like you learned in middle school. It hasn't changed. Credit, collateral, capacity. But we're talking about business credit, right? We're not talking about personal credit. We're talking about personal assets, or business assets, not personal assets, business capacity. So the 3 C's for the business. We say what we're going to do here. It's matched in the agreement that they sign. And then this here just helps you understand the process. But in general, this is summarized here. So we've always told you what we do and the steps we go through. Today, we just gave you, I guess, another layer of detail in case you felt like you needed to know that. The key to understand is that we're here to create a fundable business. Once we've created a fundable business, then we can go to funding, whether it be through the Chapman Fund or elsewhere, and that you're not responsible for the implementation. Your role is to go out and create awareness and to generate clients. They pay you and we do all the work. It's a pretty good deal, right? You generate the clients, they pay you, we do all the work. Plus, you get to pick how much they pay you because we're providing you an editable version of the client agreement, and you can put whatever performance fee on there that you want. So if you wanted to put a 10% performance fee, which means of the capital they raise, you get 10% of, or you can make it 20%. We have one gentleman, he prices his much higher than that, or you could leave out and not have any performance fee that's paid after the capital raise. That's up to you. That's up to you. We also stated that we're running a Valentine's promotion where we will pay you $10,000 for every client you bring on in addition to the client. So the client still gets theirs, but we're also paying you $10,000 for each client you bring on between now and Valentine's Day. So I know several of you have found that as additional motivation. So with that being said, please make sure that you're scheduling our one-on-ones. You know how to call us, you know how to email us. We use Calendly to schedule, and let's review where all your clients are and make sure that we're properly supporting you. And as a branch, you made promises, right? You have commitments, and make sure that you're doing what you promised to do. And of course, hold us responsible to do what we promised to do. But now maybe you have a more thorough understanding of the steps. All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you back Monday morning. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.